So the objective of the webinar today is to share details of the two-day Communications Symposium that we held in Barcelona. That was an official side event of the UN Ocean Decade Conference. As some of you will be aware, we had limited capacity at the venue, and so we really wanted to open up the conversation to those of you who couldn't attend, to those of you who weren't able to travel, and also to people who are just finding out about the project and the symposium for the first time. So a bit of housekeeping to begin with. We have captions enabled for those of you who would like to use that function. We also have interpretation, that's live interpretation, available in French, Spanish, and Portuguese. So if you'd like to use that function, the way you do it is you go to the globe at the bottom of the screen and you select the channel of the language that you wish to use. Just to let you know, we'll also be sharing recordings of the webinar in all languages and making those recordings available after the end of the symposium. So I'm joined today by my colleague Natalie Anderson from Communications Inc., who's going to be speaking as well. And pending some technical issues, we're also hoping to be joined by Vinicius Lindoso from IOC UNESCO. What we're going to do in the webinar is we're going to give you an overview of the symposium. So what it was, who was there, how it was run. We'll then talk about how the considerations of justice, equity, diversity and inclusion were incorporated into the symposium and the ongoing work of the advisory board for the project. Then I'll give an overview of the key themes and insights from the discussions that emerged, and we'll talk about next steps for the projects, leaving some time for questions and answers. So throughout the webinar, we're really keen to gather your thoughts on the project and what we're presenting today. And the way we're collecting this is through Slido. So Slido is an online kind of polling survey platform where you can give us your input. You can either do that through your phone by scanning the QR code that you can see on the screen at the moment, or you can go onto the website that is slido.com and input the hashtag Ocean Communications, and you'll see a series of questions come up as we move through the webinar. So I just really wanted to start off the session by locating us a bit within the project. So the symposium was not a standalone event, but part of an 18-month project called the Advancing Strategic Ocean Communication Project that some of you might be aware of already. It launched at the start of the year, and the partners are the Kluskul-Benkian Foundation, the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, IOC UNESCO, and Communications Inc. And the partners really came together around the shared belief that strategic communication, when deployed effectively, can achieve the change in attitudes and behaviours and policies that we need to better protect the planet. So communications in particular has been identified in the New Ocean Decade Challenge 10 white paper as a key driver in restoring humanity's relationship with the ocean. What do we mean by strategic communication? So by strategic communication, we mean that a communications approach that begins at the end. So communications that we design around the outcome that we want to achieve. So figuring out who needs to say what, when, and how to impact that change. It's an approach that's not new. It's used to great impact in different sectors, such as peace building, public health, politics, marketing, and more recently, climate communications. And we really believe that there's so much to learn and so much potential to use this approach within the ocean sector. So the project itself was 2 years in the design phase. We consulted with a number of other groups and networks to design the project, including the UN Foundations Dialogue, the One Ocean Flotilla, members of the UN Ocean Decade Challenge 10 expert group, the Ocean Literacy Community, and the UN Decade Strategic Communications Group, among others. And so the Communications Symposium itself was the first in-person event of the project. The project as a whole seeks to advance the practice of strategic communication, make evidence and tools more accessible to all, and finally galvanise greater investment in ocean communications, because we know that that's a challenge that a lot of you are facing. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, another Natalie, who's going to talk you through a bit of what we actually did at the symposium and how it was run.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So as Natalie mentioned, we held a 2-day symposium as part of the project. It was an official satellite event for the UN Ocean Decade held in Barcelona. And ahead of the symposium, we conducted 23 interviews with those who had expressed interest in the project, and the outcomes of these interviews fed into the design of the event. The symposium was aimed to bring together ocean communicators to drive momentum for more impactful, research-led and collaborative approaches to affecting change. And the 2 days were centred around the key question of how can we more effectively use strategic communications to achieve action for the ocean. So we received a huge volume of interest in the symposium, which was really exciting. We had over 250 registrations in a 1-week period for the 60 places available. And the final list of invites to the event were divided equally between Global North and Global South. And the selection was made in accordance with the project's justice, equity, diversity and inclusion principles to foster a more inclusive approach to ocean communication. In total, we had 53 communicators attend from 26 countries, and the symposium was structured into 4 key thematic sessions, following themes that had previously been identified as part of the project architecture. The first session was on the use of research to understand audiences and how this can help us to design strategic communication campaigns. The second session, Messages and Messengers, focused around how to effectively reach audiences. So who needs to say what, to whom, to achieve the impact, and how do we figure this out? The third session on training and education looked at how we can better upskill different types of messengers to communicate on ocean issues more effectively. And finally, the last session was on scaling up, considering how we can ensure that we are reaching target audiences at scale and with the most effective communications possible to achieve maximum impact. Each session consisted of 3 to 4 spotlight speakers, followed by a moderated discussion in groups of around 6 to 8 people, and these were centred around key questions. We also had a session on justice, equity, diversity and inclusion, which Vinny will be here to talk about more in a moment. So the discussions were designed to move participants towards identifying concrete principles, actions or solutions that could move forward the use of impactful ocean strategic communication. And the purpose of these facilitated discussions was to gain insights, ideas, or identify challenges and barriers, which will then be used by the project team to develop best practice principles for effective ocean communications. The content of these conversations were captured on flip charts throughout the discussions by the group facilitator. And we then asked each group to come up with 2 to 3 actions, opportunities, ideas for resources or approaches for each thematic session, which were then submitted through Slido. The final question on Slido varied by session. So as an example, for training and upskilling Ocean Voices, we asked for actions, opportunities, solutions, ideas, or resources that could be used by or to support voices to communicate on ocean issues more effectively. And for scaling up, we asked for approaches or solutions that could be implemented to increase the scale and uptake of effective communications practices. We have since had a debrief with the group moderators and project team to further discuss the outputs of the outcomes of the symposium, which Natalie will go into more. And the symposium was designed around 3 key principles. The first, connect. We encouraged the meeting and mixing of attendees during the sessions, and we aimed for all participants to have quality exchanges with as many others in the room as possible, in order to develop and further the global network of communication practitioners. Collaborate, we asked that all attendees participated actively and openly the symposium, as I've talked through, was organised around these interactive sessions with breakout conversations, and this allowed us to generate insights and discussions. We encouraged all participants to come ready to listen, to share, and to actively contribute so that we could make the most of the expertise that were present in the room. And finally, challenge. We encouraged ambitious thinking, fresh ideas, and honest, respectful challenges to current approaches in order to make ocean communication more impactful. And whilst we did want to share and celebrate and record what is working, we also wanted to make space for more challenging conversations around what needs to be done better or differently and how we can do this. So we devised these principles to help us achieve the objectives of the symposium, which were to raise the visibility of strategic communications in the ocean community, to gather insight on best practice and better understand the needs of a network. I'm now going to hand over to Vinny. Is Vinny on the call? Yeah, great. To talk more about justice, equity, diversity and inclusion principles that have been put together by the Project JEDI board.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And hi to everyone, and good morning for those who are sort of near our time zone. Good day to everyone else. And I am really pleased to be here. I'm really pleased to be part of this project as a whole, and very pleased to be talking about this important issue of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's not a new issue for most of us. We've probably been hearing and talking about it for a while, and it definitely was not new as such for the members, participants of the symposium. But what really struck me and positively surprised me was how center stage the discussion around JEDI principles took in the symposium and has taken in the project as a whole. So as Natalie mentioned, we had a session on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is probably the most cross-cutting topic that the project is addressing. You know, already for once, I started applying those principles in the way that the discussion was woven into the symposium, which it meant that we didn't talk about it at the end, as most other projects and meetings usually do. The JEDI principles were, talked about throughout the sessions. They were a constant part of the conversation, and the specific session where we brought to light and discuss the principles that should govern the project as a whole, and that we should strive for in strategic ocean communications was on the first day, which I think really set the stage for discussions to be more targeted around these issues throughout the symposium. Our goal at the symposium was to both do a sort of reckoning on, is everyone on the same page about what JEDI principles are and how we integrate them into strategic ocean communications. And so we were able to hear from one of the members of our JEDI board in the project, Barbara, who gave us a very nice presentation around, dispelling some of the myths and centering the discussion around what JEDI principles actually are. Things such as we shouldn't be just talking about the future in terms of lining up equity, different opportunities, allocating resources fairly, but also talking about the past and using strategic ocean communications to rectify some of the historical wrongs that we have been witnessing among minorities and Global South participants, for example. So that set the stage for then a discussion on how do we bring home these principles around strategic ocean communications. And this is probably the challenge, but also great opportunity that we are faced with in this project, which is how does justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, what do they actually mean in practice for ocean communicators in our day-to-day lives? And so it was really rewarding to hear from people how they have faced these issues on the day-to-day, from organizing an event to setting up a PowerPoint presentation or organizing a social media campaign, and having the feedback from the community. We had participants from 26 countries, as Natalie Anderson mentioned. Many of those from the Global South. There was a very strong presence from colleagues across many developing countries. So that in itself ensured that their voices were heard, and there's no better way than making sure that they're in the room so that these issues can be discussed with as much diversity as possible. And I would consider that one of the small victories that we can claim is that we're opening up spaces for those people to come and really pour their heart out to us. And going forward, we have set up these JEDI principles that you can find on the website, and we'll pop in a link if we haven't already. That the project will be following, but also the principles that we hope to see in the outcome of what the project will leave behind once it's finished. And I really invite you all to take part. There's a little Slido survey with different questions about the topics we'll be discussing today, and that were discussed at the symposium. But specifically, if you could take a very close and dear look at the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion questions, because it's really fundamental if we are to do to have a concrete sort of output from the project, that we hear what you need. How have you faced these issues in your lives as ocean communicators, and what guidance do you feel that you would have benefited from, or people that we're also really interested in experiences you may have met while attending different meetings and traveling around the world. With that, I think I can just invite you to really bring the JEDI power forward.
So, as Natalie explained earlier, the whole idea of the symposium was built around this idea of gathering insight and expertise. So that was fundamental to the structure. What I'm going to do now is talk you through some of the key insights that were gathered through the symposium. The first one, so we must make justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion central to our approach and ensure it's a truly global network. Vinny has covered already, but what I'll do with these other four is I'll go through them in turn. So first is that there is appetite for more opportunities to gather communications practitioners together. We need to prioritize shifting current perceptions of strategic communications. There is opportunity to collate evidence and pool resources to optimize our impact. And finally, that strong case studies can form the basis of good practice principles. So the first one of those, gathering the communications community. So overall, what we heard again and again at the symposium is that the appetite for more opportunities to gather as communicators was really high. So a common theme to emerge from the feedback was the desire to maintain momentum within the project and for more opportunities to engage with other communicators. There were lots of different suggestions on how this might function. So there were suggestions of regular calls, a newsletter, online and in-person meetings, regional groups, a shared platform of collated resources, and also maximising the opportunities of events at key fora, such as COPs and ocean literacy dialogue events. There was also recognition in the responses that not all platforms suit all people, and so there might be geographic variations in how we engage or how people prefer to communicate. But regardless of format, there was an underlying theme of the desire for increased connection and communication within communicators. Reflecting on this, the objectives, so why people wanted more desire to have these moments, was twofold. So there was an internal element to the objective. So within the communications community, we've been told that often people feel quite isolated within their organizations, particularly in the smaller organizations. They can operate individually, and it's really useful to have the opportunity to come together to share insight and expertise, but also just to share thinking on the challenges that are being faced. The second objective within this was people want to engage more external actors. So there was this real desire to raise the visibility of communications within the ocean space, to shift perceptions of what communications is, and to build a greater understanding of the value and impact that communications can have. Building on that last point, another key theme to arise was really the need to make the case for communications more effectively. And so to shift perceptions away from it being an approach that just spends money to a way of driving progress towards project and organisational outcomes, and really an effective tool to mobilise resources as we create change. So in some conversations that we saw, this was articulated as a need to better make the business case for investing in strategic communications. In one group in particular, there was a conversation around creating opportunities to engage high levels of management, for example, CEOs, in meetings on investing in the power of communications. And it was also particularly interesting that whatever the thematic discussion group, this is kind of ultimately where a lot of the conversations came back to. So the training and education session, for example, we'd envisaged that as a conversation that would be mainly about how can we better upskill ocean voices, but it kind of merged into a conversation also of how can we better train, educate, and engage other ocean actors in the potential for comms, to really get them more invested in it as an approach. So if the need that was identified within the symposium really focused on better making the case for effective communications approaches, how can we actually do that? So in part, the answer to this emerged through the research and evidence group. So the collation of an evidence base was seen as vital in order to shift sectoral perceptions of strategic communications towards a discipline that drives impact and leverages resources. The sharing and pooling of research and insights was a key theme to emerge in this conversation. So this took the form both of collating existing evidence and also the creation of new studies and resources. And really at the heart of many of these discussions was a desire for there to be a single centralized location from which communicators can access existing data and insights on audiences, on evidence, on the efficacy of campaigns, as well as data from other sectors that could be of use. So one example that was given was lifestyle data that could help us in developing targeting strategies. Within this conversation, there was also a particular appetite on resources that help people understand how to better use research and evidence to design their comms campaigns. So there were multiple suggestions of how-to guides and training resources that came up. Suggestions for these resources tended to focus around the technicalities of using research. So for example, how to start comms research, how to commission research, how you define a research objective, how to develop a monitoring and evaluation framework. There was also quite a lot of conversation around the number of free tools available. So for example, Google Analytics, and the desire for a resource that collated these free tools and provided guidance on how to use them. And within the groups, there are also discussions on the multiple forms that those training resources could take, from written outputs to more interactive training sessions. And finally, there was also an omnipresent conversation really about how the ocean sector might collaborate to create new shared sources of data that could be used by communicators. And this came about from the recognition that often organisations just don't have the budgets available for the research, but the pooling of resources could lead to studies that are beneficial across the field. And so within this discussion, the Ocean and Society Survey, it was formerly known as the Global Ocean Literacy Survey, was highlighted as a really useful new tool with a rigorous methodology behind it that could help us to gather comparative data on a range of audiences to both design campaign strategies, but also monitor shifts in perceptions and intended behaviours. I think Natalie, I'll just put it in the chat already, I'm going to say she's put a link in the chat for you to all read more about it, but I really recommend looking into it, and we're quite excited about potential future collaboration with that survey to bring that kind of useful data to you all. And then the final point that I wanted to make on insights was just that it was abundantly clear in our discussions that there's a lot of really great, impressive work going on out there, that organizations and individuals are developing insights and learnings. There's great expertise, but it's not always being shared, and that is currently the kind of the missed opportunity. So there was real appetite for some of these positive case studies to be collated and used in the creation of good practice principles, and these are outputs that we'll continue to work on with our thematic chapter groups. And then finally, while there are a number of resources in existence for training and upskilling communicators, there were also some particular gaps where the participants in the symposium would like to see more resources developed, and kind of more support in locating existing resources that might be out there. So with all of that in mind, with that kind of brilliant and very generous conversation that we got from the participants of the symposium, what comes next? So firstly, there is a high appetite for action, and that was greatly encouraging for us as the project team to see so many people out there excited about engaging in the project and getting on board. We want to caveat this with, we really, really want to be ambitious. Like we believe that this project can really help move the dial and shift the narrative on communications, but we also want to be realistic on what we can deliver within the scope and resources of the project. So we currently have funding for this project up until the UN Ocean Conference in 2025. So what we're now doing is gathering as a project team to reflect on the insights that were gathered, think about how we can best serve the community within this time, and also think about what we are best placed to deliver. But the particular areas of focus will be the ongoing inclusion of JEDI principles into communications work to ensure that the movement is truly global, focusing on helping communicators to share good practice, to drive forwards the use of research and evidence among communicators, and finally that piece on changing perceptions of strategic communications itself and how it can be used. So if you would like to be involved in any of that, which we very much hope you will, what can you do? So at the moment, the main way to keep updated on the project is to sign up to our mailing list. And so what we'll do via the main mailing list is update people on events that we're planning, and also share publications. So Next week, we'll be releasing the insights report that we mentioned that's based on the symposium. Please read the report, please share it, and please also give us your feedback as to whether what you're reading resonates with you as communicators. And if it doesn't, or if your experiences are different, or you feel like there's anything that we've missed, please let us know. Also, help us identify opportunities for online and in-person events to gather communicators. So we're very, very open to collaboration at different events with different partners. So if you've got an event coming up and you think that there might be a place for communications within that, please let us know. And the best way to do that is through the Ocean ISU email address, which you can see there. So oceanisu@communicationsinc.co.uk. So thank you, Natalie. We're now going to move on to a question and answer session. So if you do have any questions for us, please do put them in the chat, and either myself or someone else on the project team will do our best to answer.
I'm going to stop sharing, just give it a moment for any questions that might be coming in. Just a reminder that we do also have the Slido. I'm going to pop the link again in the chat. If anybody would like to submit any feedback to the questions that are on there, we'd love to hear from you. But if anybody does have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A now. We've got a question coming. Is there a chance to branch out to practitioners' countries so communicators from a specific country can gather and share experiences? Natalie, do you want to?
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. So the best practice principles that we're going to be developing and the associated resources are really just a launching point for this work. As anyone that works in communications will know, it's key to adapt your approaches to your target audiences. And so what we really hope is that these resources will provide an initial point to do that from. Within the project itself, we won't have capacity to run networks, as it were, in individual countries, but we'd be very interested to work with people who are, to kind of help make the resources as applicable as possible. Also, if anyone currently is either running a practitioner group in a specific country at the moment or is interested in setting that up, we'd be very interested in talking about how we can kind of better integrate our work and support you.
Thanks, Natalie. I've got one here that's probably going to go to Vinny. So Vinny talked about the strong commitment to the importance of Jedi principles. Can you say more about how the Jedi principles can and will be incorporated into the actual work, tools and approaches project?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I hope my audio is a little better. I've changed connectivity. The goal of the Jedi board, as we're calling this group of, I think, 6 people who are actively working on Jedi issues as part of the project, is twofold. On the one hand, we're gonna act as a sort of internal oversight on Jedi principles for the whole of the project, and we sort of already started, with the organization of the symposium itself, making sure that Jedi principles were articulated well into the agenda, Also that the symposium attendance was diverse, etc. So we're working very closely with Natalie Anderson, Natalie Hart, and the rest of the project team to make sure those principles, don't just stay on paper, but they are actually the project does what it preaches essentially. And one member of the Jedi board is sitting on each of the thematic chapter groups um, for the duration of the project, so that will allow us to provide input on all the recommendations that will be coming out of each thematic chapter work. Now, the other axis is that we are hoping to bring together, very much based on inputs we got from the symposium, inputs we're getting through these two post-symposium webinars, and through a variety of interviews and encounters that will happen throughout the project timeframe. It's to bring together and sort of provide a lay of the land of, what are actually Jedi principles when we're talking about strategic ocean communication. What those principles should be. We started with the document that I mentioned before to lay out more or less these principles, but the document remains very high level, a little too high level for my taste. And so the goal is, how can we dig deeper into, how do you make a PowerPoint presentation, Jedi? It may seem like, not quote unquote important, but actually that's the kind of question that we should be asking ourselves if we're to make everything that we do in ocean communications inclusive and upholding of these principles. So we are hoping to issue a set of recommendations, and beyond recommendations, really concrete guidance for communicators who are seeking to bring the Jedi principles to their day-to-day work, whether it's organizing events or putting together a communication campaign, or just writing a social media post. So we really want to get down to the details of what Jedi principles mean in practice of communication. And I apologize for the quality of my audio. Unfortunately, I was caught unprepared by a computer failure, so I had to connect via my phone, which thanks to technology, does not have a jack for normal earphones. So I'm having to use the Wi-Fi headset. Anyway, I apologize, and I'll make sure to include this in the recording that will be made available next week.
Thank you, Vinny. If I may come to you with another question from Barbara regarding ocean communications in general. Does anybody feel that it was not so clear about the difference about the UN Ocean Decade Conference held in Barcelona and the UN Ocean Conference held in Lisbon, and the one that will be coming up in Nice in 2025?
If I understood the question correctly, I think it was more addressed to the group as a whole. But I did notice that there was a lot of confusion among participants, particularly those not very accustomed to all the set of UN conferences that are continually happening. But yeah, so just to clarify on that, the Ocean Decade Conference that happened in Barcelona, it was part of the UN Ocean Decade work stream organized by UNESCO and the Spanish government. And the next conference in that series is going to take place probably in 2027, and then another one in 2030 when the Ocean Decade is set to conclude. So that's a conference series that tracks progress of the Ocean Decade as a major UN initiative. All the UN agencies are part of it, but it's led in terms of implementation by UNESCO. Now, next year, there will be a UN Ocean, so no decade, just Ocean Conference in Nice. And that conference is tracking progress of the Sustainable Development Goal 14, which is the Ocean SDG, part of the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So that conference is going to be, it's part of a separate track, but of course everything is interconnected.
I think we've lost Vinny. I'm very sorry. Yeah. We will move on to the next question and maybe come back to it. Oh, hi Vinny, you're back. We lost you there for a moment. Sorry.
Sorry. Anyway, so yeah, the next year it's a larger conference with for sure some Ocean Decade components, but it's a much wider conference organized by the UN headquarters and not by UNESCO.
Thank you, Vinny. I'm going to hand over to Natalie to ask about how we are bringing together the learnings from the symposium into the, well, specifically the training thematic chapter group, but that will apply to the 4 chapter groups across the project.
Yeah, thank you. So just to explain, just in case any of you are new to the project, when we launched the project back in January, we opened up a call for application that resulted in chapter groups. So there are chapter groups. There's one on research and evidence, one on messages and messengers, one on research and education. Have I said that already? I get lost. One on scaling up, that's with funders. And the idea of these chapter groups is that they were groups of specialists who were selected both because of their particular areas of expertise, but also to make sure that we had expert groups that were diverse in terms of sector and geography. And within each chapter group, we made sure that there was expertise from outside the ocean sector. We kicked off the first meetings of these chapter groups before the symposium, and we're currently setting up their schedule for the next few months. And there are going to be key outputs related to those chapter groups, one of which will be the creation of these best practice guidelines or principles that Vinny was just talking about. Within the actual Communications Symposium, there was at least one representative of each chapter group present. So what we're going to be doing in the next meeting is we're going to be taking the findings from the symposium into those chapter group meetings, both through the individuals that were present, but also through the report that will be circulated. And so there'll be the opportunity for the chapter groups to discuss the themes that arose, to discuss the needs that were articulated by the communicators at the symposium, and then to think about how we can best develop these principles and disseminate them in a way that responds directly to the needs and the challenges that were brought up within the symposium conversations.
Brilliant, thank you, Natalie. Vinny, got a question around the criteria to select the participants for the conference, which I believe applies to both the Decade conference itself and also the Communication Symposium. The question says, I believe one thing we need to be sure about in the JEDI principles is transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't speak much for the criteria for the conference. Is that I can't see the question, so I'm just trying to to check. Sorry.
Oh, it's from
Look at.
Barbara. Yeah.
Okay.
I think Vinny, it's okay to just talk about it with regards to the symposium, which is yeah, we can hopefully talk more to.
But I just wanted to check with Barbara whether she's talking about the criteria to participate at the Ocean Conference next year, or whether she meant for the one that's just passed.
Ah, I'm not too sure. Oh, Barbara has. I wonder if I can.
Oh, she put her hand up.
I can bring Barbara in, maybe.
I can
Hi,
speak
Barbara.
for.
We can hopefully hear you.
Hi guys, can you listen to me?
Yes, great. Go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah.
Lovely.
So sorry, and thank you so much for the presentation. It was just like things that I felt after the conference and the symposium itself. It was actually the lack of transparency. Sometimes I know there was like everybody was hurrying to get everything together, and some of the criteria were available, but thinking about all the Jedi principles that we were talking about during the conference, to be transparent was one that I really missed, you know, like how it was selected, who were there, why they were there. Those information would also help us to construct, I don't know, like a change in the system, you know, like, see, the criteria were all the same. We need to change maybe some criteria, or maybe like give some priorities for some of those criteria, and by looking for those information online and not being able to find, then I think that this is something that we should apply for our project, and enforce or try to bring them together to the conference, and to communication in general related to ocean, right? And thank you
Yeah,
for
no,
the answers and everything.
thanks, Barbara. Okay, got it. But you're definitely right that more transparency is needed. And I think that's actually a great recommendation to come out in terms of when organizing events, whether virtual or physical, to be really transparent about the limitations, why there are limitations. Sometimes it's space, sometimes it's that the group cannot be too big. Sometimes you cannot have 300 people at a practical workshop, and so you need to make some cutting line. And I think you are absolutely right that all these decisions and constraints need to be very accessible to everyone who is applying, and so that everyone is on the same page about it. For Barcelona, I think those were listed on the website. Of course, the UN always works on the same principles, and those are to increase as much as possible the geographical diversity, the gender balance, and also for the Ocean Decade, there was a real preoccupation to diversify the sectoral representation. We are very lucky that we've got people involved in the decade from all walks of life, but it also poses a challenge. And the team worked really, really hard, and under a lot of public frustration many times to ensure that we have the best representation possible. Of course, it's never possible to please everyone, or to admit as many people as we'd like. But yeah, I agree that we have to make more of an effort of making sure that the criteria are transparent and very easy to access.
Thank you, Vinny. It's also just worth mentioning that Barbara is on our Jedi board, so we are really delighted to have her front and centre of, championing Jedi principles throughout the project. There's a question in Barcelona and afterwards. I got engaged in various conversations with fellow ocean science communicators that feel we are putting up great communication in terms of materials, and we are reaching a ton of ocean lovers around the globe, but we are not reaching the masses who could not care less about ocean issues, despite having a large impact on it. Does anyone have any thoughts? I feel like that's a huge question to answer, but Natalie may be able to give a few comments.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we had an extra hour. No, I mean it's a great question, and I think it's one of the core challenges and questions being asked by ocean communicators the world over. One thing, so the first thing I'd say is I think that the question really highlights the difference in approaches between communications and strategic communications. So yes, like there is an approach to communications where you think about what you want to say. And I think that this is an approach that is particularly taken within the science community, is that they think about the message that they have from their science, and you know it's always really important when you've got a new study that you're excited about, that you communicate to the world. But one of the things that we know from behavioral change is that there's this, it's the information deficit fallacy, right? It's not just enough to give people information. It's looking at all of the factors that come around that influence how they behave. So the first thing I'd say is like, yes, we need to be engaging more people. And in order to do that, we need to think about who those people are, where they are, what matters to them, like what are their values, what are their motivations, what are the challenges they face in their everyday lives, where do they go for information, who do they trust, and we go to where all those audiences are in order to communicate with them. We can't expect people to come to us. Yes, if people already love the ocean, that's great, but in some ways that's preaching to the converted. I'm not sure who that question came from, but I would say to everyone on this call, the Challenge 10 white paper that's being created as part of the UN Ocean Decade is about restoring society's relationship with the ocean. And a key part of that is engaging the parts of society that don't currently have that connection. And that paper is broken down into 4 key drivers of how we can do that, and provides recommendations within each of those. And so it's a massive question. I think that white paper is a good starting place, but it's a conversation that I hope we all have a lot more often in order to kind of drive this work forward.
Brilliant, thank you, Natalie. We've come to the end of our questions, so just to say thank you all so much for joining us today, and yeah, please do keep involved in the project, sign up for the newsletter if you haven't already, and we would really value your feedback via the Slido as well. We'll keep that open for a while longer, so yeah, it'd be great to hear from you. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you hopefully all on a webinar again soon. Thanks so much, everyone.